This is a church that is on fire. You can feel the heat as soon as you walk through the front door. This is amazing. You guys are enthusiastic. And I even have my new friend, Miss T, over here, who happen to wear the same colors as your big book and everything. So thank you for sporting that. Yeah, I still have to get up off the floor after seeing this because I've been doing a lot of research along these topics, and it's neat seeing a church that is this forward in advance on the very cutting edge of what might be happening in the world today. So great job to you guys doing this. But today I want to speak about a judgment because it's I'm going to do an end run on you guys today, and I want you to think if there's a judgment that's going to come after this, when the great day of the Lord happens and judgment does happen, hopefully after we're raptured, which is what I do believe, there was another judgment that came before, just several thousand years ago, about 4,500 years ago. And in fact, I have walked up to dinosaur bones. We have several of them. We use them in our ministry. And I've touched those bones, and it's an eerie experience to know you're touching the bone of an animal that was judged by God for the sin of man and for all the other stuff that was going on before the flood. So when you lay your hands on that bone, you're like, my gosh, this creature died and it drowned because of the judgment of God. And if that's true, well, is there going to be another judgment that we should be aware of and be precautious about and be telling people about? So I found myself about 15 years ago when I was going through the process of converting to creationists. You see, I got saved when I was 11. My parents separated, and I went through a crazy, fun, rebellious teenage era. Did anyone else ever do that? No show of hands, of course, but I went crazy till I was about 17, and I'm like, this is no fun anymore. I'm going to come back to God. I repented, and I'd like to say I've been locked in with the Lord ever since, as best as I can. Got married at 21, been now married for over 35 years and 4 kids, and just had granddaughter number 2 named Olivia. She's just a little saint, and my 2-year-old grandson, all he wants to do is sword fight, just sword fight, lightsabers. Now he's on to real swords. He wants to be a knight when he grows up. It's incredible. All that stuff's great by me. So, but about 15 years ago, I was with my oldest daughter, Michaela, at the Dinosaur Provincial Park up in Canada. And we went to this outdoor dinosaur exhibit, and it was hot like an oven hot. It was a really, really hot day, and we was probably the peak of the heat that day. And it was me and my son and my daughter Michaela, and we're there. And it was an outdoor dinosaur exhibit, so they had some plexiglass, and behind it they left the dinosaur uncovered, what paleontologists call in situ, so just laying there as they found it. And it was a huge Edmontosaurus, like a duck-billed dinosaur, about 30 feet long. And it was all twisted up like this, and you could see how fresh and preserved that this creature looked. And we were there talking about it, and there was no one else around except for one other guy and his son. And his son was there, and his son walked up to this little podium that was in this outdoor exhibit, and he pressed play so that we could hear the museum's explanation of how this dinosaur got here and was dead. You know, to this day we could see it. And the museum audio tape began to play and says, well, you know, millions of years ago, this dinosaur drowned because it tried crossing what used to be a stream, but it turned into a river, you see, because there was this big tropical storm, and this huge storm happened, and then this creature tried to swim across, and it couldn't make it, so it drowned. And then another one got up like single file, and it lined up, and it tried to cross over the river, and then it drowned. And then another one drowned. One by one, they made it seem like these dinosaurs were trying to ford this river, and they just kept drowning. And I was getting a little bit embarrassed because it was a really lame explanation of what we were looking at, because as far as you can see with your eyes, it's a 14-mile bone bed called the Hilda Bone Bed. As far as you can see, literally, there's these big hoodoos, these big mounds that are not just sprinkled with dinosaurs, they're stuffed with dead dinosaurs. Not thousands, but tens of thousands of dead ceratopsian dinosaurs, these big dinosaurs that look like rhinoceroses with big shields and horns. And they're stuffed in these big mounds along with fish and dozens of other species. And that was the moment that my daughter had it. Her light bulb went on, and right in the presence of this young boy, he was maybe 10, and his dad, who was inching closer and closer and closer to us, her light bulb turned on. And she's like, Dad, that is the dumbest explanation I've ever heard. There's no way that animals would line up and try to ford a little tropical storm because these dinosaurs, as far as I can see, they're under 50 feet of mud. How'd a little local flood do that when it overflowed its banks? So why is that dead dinosaur under 50 feet of mud? How much higher did the water have to be to bury those dinosaurs under 50 feet of settled sediment? That's just crazy, and it never happens today. And they're all mixed with fish. How in the world would a little overflowing riverbank do that? And then she just going on and on and on, and I'm like, yeah, point for Michaela, point. But to a point, I'm a pretty outgoing guy. In fact, my wife would say I have post-creation exposure disorder because that's all I want to talk about. You know, I can't tell you how many times I've been kicked under the dinner table. Stop talking about Genesis. That's enough. You know, so, but I'm like, wow, Michaela, that's kind of awkward because this guy's here, and it was his son who pushed play on the museum tape, and I'm almost going to tell her you need to tone it down a little bit because he might believe this stuff, and I don't want to be rude. So she went off and had her complete epiphany. It was like a 5-minute little rant, a creationist rant, when her light bulb really turned on. And so that moment disappeared, and we walked back to the main building there, and she walked inside to get an ice cream cone, and I walked out to the hot car to go get the car and pull it up and get the AC running. And on my way across the hot tarmac in the parking lot there's this guy again that was with us when my daughter had her rant, and his son was not there, and he starts walking towards me diagonally through the parking lot. And I'm like, oh, God, here it comes. I'm not ready for this. I don't want to have the hostile evolutionist discussion in this hot tarmac. It's not going to give me patience for what this guy's going to say. He's going to say I'm a bad parent for teaching my kid all these fairy tales. All this stuff, my brain starts playing the tape. And he comes up to me, and he was really polite. He says, well, sir, do you have a minute? And I said, sure. He said, without dabbling around, he says, I'm a licensed geologist. And I'm like, oh, I know what's coming next. Millions of years and everything. And he says, he didn't do that. He says, I'm a licensed geologist, and in 5 minutes, your daughter has completely proved to me the historicity of the book of Genesis. Can you believe that? I was shocked. He's like, look, I used to be a Christian. Then I went to go through my geology program, and they had millions of years and layers and all that stuff, but it never made sense to me, but I ditched my faith and jumped in the world of geology. But hearing your daughter explain it, it's the most obvious thing. It had to be a massive worldwide catastrophe. That's the only thing that would explain what we saw that day. So you can take dinosaurs to Jesus. In fact, I'll go one step further and say it's dinosaurs that have taken millions of people away from Jesus. Because, look, I was on the call once with a cell phone company doing some technical support stuff, and we had a moment to talk. We were talking about the Bible and creation and everything, and he says, well, you know, I gave up Christianity as a viable religion when I ran into Luke chapter 3. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That has all the genealogies. It's got 77 patriarchs that go all the way back from Jesus, all the way through, you know, David and Abraham and Noah, and it goes through all the patriarchs, and it goes back to Adam. And it says plain as day that Adam was the son of God. He wasn't the son of a Neanderthal or Homo habilis or Lucy or any of these things. So it's a very clear, tight timeline that shows a young earth. And he's like, yep, that's exactly why I walked away from the faith. Because dinosaurs lived millions of years ago, and science says that millions of years happened, so I had to choose, and I chose science, and I ditched the faith. So these things regarding dinosaurs and millions of years and things like that, these are issues. And I have today, what I'm going to share with you is honestly what is called a broken arrow moment for the theory of evolution. And a broken arrow moment is when Native Americans were out fighting. If someone stood up, a leader in the tribe stood up and broke an arrow and threw it to the ground, that's a retreat sign. Like, get out of here, we're overrun, just grab your stuff and leave. That's exactly what's happening right now in the field of evolution with respect to dinosaurs, and I'll show you guys the evidence for it. There is currently no explanation offered, no rescuing device that can explain soft tissues found in dinosaur bones. None. It's game over. It's case closed. We're doing movies about this stuff, videos about this stuff, and it comes down to collagen. You see, bones are an infusion of two things, a product called hydroxyapatite, which is a hard bone mineral, and that's about 60% of bone. About 40% of bone is collagen, which provides the soft fiber-like matrix so that bones can bend. And if Thanksgiving you take a wishbone and you put it in vinegar, well, it eats away the minerals and leaves the collagen, the fibular matrix that makes up the soft, pliable part of the bone. That's why you can tie it up in a knot, tie a wishbone in a knot. Well, before dinosaur soft tissue became a big thing, and it's a big thing now because there's 150 peer-reviewed scientific journals about the soft tissues that they're finding in dinosaur bones. Before it became a big thing, there were 5 studies that came out by the secular scientists that tried to estimate the lifespan of collagen in bones. So if you take a cow bone and throw it out in the mud, scientists have tried to estimate how long can the biological collagen, the soft tissue, last. And some scientists say, well, I think about 10,000 years it should all be gone. Other scientists say maybe 30,000 years. Some scientists will say, well, the max is about 100,000 years. But one study came out and said, with about 5 scientists on it, says, well, we think under maximum ideal conditions, basically if you freeze a bone and don't subject it to heat or anything else, we think that collagen can last between 300,000 years and 900,000 years. That's as far as the scientific community is willing to admit that collagen can last inside of a bone. Well, if you've done the math already, they say the dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. That's 100 times longer than scientists say that collagen can last in their bones. And in about 10 years ago, they proved that the collagen that they're finding in bones is organic to the dinosaurs at the molecular level. So there's no more excuses when you have a dinosaur bone and it's got collagen in them, and we're finding collagen in bone after bone after bone after bone. It is ironclad evidence that that creature did not die 66 million years ago. In fact, we have T-Rex thin cuts right now that we're doing that show clear evidence of asphyxia. The creatures drowned, they died by drowning. And it's in proof and evidence all over the place. We've got a movie coming out called Operation Cold Bones. We're sending a team up to Alaska to get cold frozen bones up in the permafrost up there in the Liscombe bone bed. And we're going to go after DNA sequencing, because DNA has a half-life of about 600 years, so we might have some scraps of DNA left from dinosaurs. If we miss that and hit soft tissue, that's just fine too, because we've already found collagen in bones. So there was a judgment, and it happened before, and there is another judgment, and it's coming again. I want to talk briefly before we get into the dinosaur nitty-gritty here, because your pastor was so kind to say I don't have a stopping point, which is just great. So that's not what you say to an ADD business guy like me, so I'll just keep going. But I do want to just have a little intercession and just talk about this really quick. So think about and I'm not going to, look, I know I'm not here to preach about end times and eschatology and the rapture and things like that. It's not my area of expertise, but just Christian to Christian, let me share with you some things that are very much in alignment with what your church is doing. So Jesus himself says, as it was in the days of Noah, like in the days when the dinosaurs drowned, so will it be in the coming of the Son of Man. People are going to be having parties and drinking and having weddings and things like that, and suddenly destruction will be upon them. So what were the days of Noah? What were they like? How does Genesis 6 and the Nephilim fold into all that stuff? What is that like? So think about that. Think about Matthew 24, where Jesus says there will be wars, earthquakes, pestilences, rumors of wars, famines. Have we seen any of that? Well, those things have been around for forever, but are they ramping up? Yes, they're ramping up. Now we see transhumanism. Your pastor just talked about that. We've got a slide up there. You're going to have a speaker come talk about transhumanism. They're building in circuitry to place in with humans. They're starting to defile the image of God and the creation of God as we are. We've got wars. We've got Israel on fire just again this morning, going back to war. We've got the Gog-Magog war being prepped up. The Ezekiel things are coming into place. The chess pieces are being put onto the board. We've got pestilences, rumors of wars, earthquakes, famines. And then I want you to just think about something. And it won't even lead you to the conclusion. Just think about I'm going to make a statement, then I'm going to ask you 3 questions. The statement is this. Just take a look at the intentional rollout of the alien UAP UFO phenomenon. And I'm going to make a bold statement. You'd be blind to notice it's not on purpose. It's an absolute intentional rollout, how it's being staged. And I won't even list all this stuff. You got the Tic Tac thing in the Navy in the 2004. They admitted it's on CNN. Then you got the orb thing last year. Then you got the first disclosure and the second disclosure. Then you've got the E.T. movie coming back. And do you think Steven Spielberg's new movie just happened to be coming out when it's coming out? And look, I am the furthest guy away from a tinfoil conspiracy guy you'll ever meet. I'm a rational businessman who happens to be a Christian as well. But just look at go on ChatGPT, just do this exercise. Go on ChatGPT after I'm done today, and just ask ChatGPT, what are the top 10 things that have happened over the last 30 years related to UFOs, UAPs, and aliens? And look at the milestones, that like the movies and the releases and the orb thing that went on and the disclosure and the second disclosure. Is it accelerating? It's very obvious that it isn't. So the question is this. Do you think that is on purpose? Or is it just some random thing? Oh, we found another alien again. Let's put it on the news. If you go back and you look at Google searches, no, it's very much coming out in blips, right? You can go back to Google and look at how often they're searching for alien or UAP or UFOs. It's coming out in blips, right? So it's kind of a staged rollout. The next question is, why do you think that is? If you rationally look at the news and all the stuff that's coming out, and it seems to be a pattern that's being exposed over time, why is that happening? And I won't even tell you what I think, but do you think it's related to this? It's quite possible. And some people would say, oh, you got your tinfoil hat on now. Well, you know what? I'll say this. People have been running around for centuries saying, oh, the rapture's coming, the rapture's coming, the rapture's coming. They're crying wolf, crying wolf, crying wolf. You know what? Some generation, some time in history, someone's going to do that, and they're going to be right about it. Think about that. It's possible. And I'm not saying it is. The rapture's going to come in 14 days. I'm just not that guy. But is it a possible reason for the rapture? Is it possible that if 1 billion people just disappear from planet Earth, wouldn't it be convenient for the news to just say, oh, well, look, the aliens took them all? It's a possibility. And I've got friends who are going to look at this at YouTube and go, there he did it. He drank the Kool-Aid. I'm not even saying that I necessarily am fully in on that. But I'm going to ask the question, is it possible? Because I tell you one thing I do know for sure. Look, I don't know about the biologics they're finding and the crafts that they're allegedly recovering. We got 2 Congress people that are coming out saying stuff that is really amazing right now. Go do your searches on that. But what I'm saying is this. The one thing I know for sure, just as a rational human, is I'm 57 years old, and if I look at the UAP, UFO, alien phenomenon, it's ramping up, and you'd be blind to say it's not a pattern of disclosure. It seems to be a systematic release of information to get people queued up for something. I know that much for sure. And if you want to connect that to the rapture and all that, maybe we can. Maybe that's why it's good and timely that we have churches doing this kind of stuff. So thank you very much for letting me take that quick little diversion, but it does tie into dinosaurs because I said I'm going to do an end run today, and the end run is simply this. If we are living in those, if you look at the old analog clock, you got the hour clock might be at 12, and the minute clock might be at 59, and the second clock might be ticking around. If that's the case, and we are in the seconds of the clock before he comes, then what I want to do today for the next hour is assure you that the first judgment really did happen, the flood. Because if I can get you convinced that Genesis 1-11 is real and it happened, and those dinosaurs lived and died and they were existing by the millions, and now they're all gone, and it's because of a flood, and if that really happened, if I can get you convinced of the first part of your Bible, when we get to the end of the Bible, well, you should believe that too. So there's a connection here with what I'm sharing. So Thank you for that little diversion as we go into the dinosaur talk here. So let's crew just a little bit more of the introduction stuff here. You guys know about our ministry. We've grown since I was here last time, which is great. God's really blessing our ministry. I think we're about to hit 240,000 subscribers. We have 30+ million views. As I sit here every day, we get between 5,000 and 10,000 views on our channel, which is just great. We have about 100,000 followers on Instagram, over 100,000 on Facebook. All glory to God. When I was here last time, I think it was only maybe 10,000 followers or 10,000 followers on Facebook or fans on Instagram. But God is ramping this stuff up, not because we're good at what we do, but because people are seeking the truth. It's interesting, if you go to Google and type in alien and you look at the frequency with respect to how people are searching that topic, you put in Nephilim and it's the same cycle. Isn't that interesting? The people are interested on the alien topic are also interested in Nephilim at the same time in history. Very interesting. So we were here last time talking about that Nephilim topic. So if you're going to go see a natural history museum, this is a great video for you guys to watch. In fact, this is a fun way to be introduced to creationism. You can just go to genesisimpact.com and you can watch that movie. We have another one called Foundations that we include free in all of the orders that come through our website. It's a great movie that shows the importance of raising your kids according to Scripture. And then we have two very specific programs to help inoculate students against the ideas of evolution. One is for 5th to 10th graders. The other one's for 11th graders on up. So it's called Debunk Evolution and 7myths.com. So those are great resources if you have kids, nieces, and nephews, or would like to go through that yourself. We have books on gender, sex, and marriage. We've got books about Noah's flood. We've got books about the Nephilim, which I think was already published. We were here last time. This is our most popular book. It's called Answers to the Top 50 Questions About Genesis, Creation, and the Flood. And Erin's in the back. She's got copies of all these books for you guys. And they are free. We have a suggested donation of $10 per item, but they're literally free. Don't feel like you have to pay. There's a QR scan code that you can back there, but just grab and go if you like. There's no obligation. We have over 100,000 people that are using our mobile app, which you can download for your phone. Just type in Genesis Apologetics, and that's a fun app because the app will lead to all the leading videos on our website. In fact, I had a gal once walk by our booth at a church here up the street, and she looked at our booth background, and she looked at her phone, and she's like, "Did you guys make this mobile app?" And I said, "Yep, that's us." And she says, "Well, I saw it advertised at a Phil Wickham conference or concert, and that app changed my life." I'm like, "Oh, that's great. So what happened?" She said, "Well, I'm a biology student at UC Davis, and the evolution teaching was getting thick and heavy there. I grabbed your app, and I just binged watched all those videos, and now I don't believe any of that evolution stuff. I know that God created it according to the Bible." So that's a great mobile app for you. We have about 7 million people now that have watched The Ark in the Darkness. If you haven't seen this was out in theaters about 2 years ago. It was out in about 1,000 theaters. You can just go to noahsflood.com and watch that for free. I think we have some elements from it I'll be folding into the talk today, but it's the most watched movie in history about Noah's flood. And that's not a boast. It was a God timing with respect to how we came about. It was a God's idea. We just stewarded the process. But it's a great movie. If you've got skeptics in your family that don't believe in the credibility of Genesis 6-9, that's a great place to land and watch that movie. Just go to noahsflood.com. And here's our overview of the talk today. We'll talk about creation, the big picture. We'll talk a little bit about the book of Job, because this is a sermon. My wife reminded me, don't just go there and teach. It's supposed to be a sermon, so I'll sermon as much as I can. I'm not a preacher by gift. I love teaching. We'll talk a little bit about the worldwide flood. We'll give some great evidence that dinosaurs lived recently, and then we'll take the implications from the book of Job. So let's look at the big picture first. I think that if you want to have fruit as a Christian, it all comes down to your root system. And if you want to have good roots, you have to believe that Genesis 1-11 is real, true history. Because what happens with a lot of the teens today that are drowning in the idea of evolution is they put God and evolution together. They become theistic evolutionists. They just think, well, God spun up evolution and he used it. Well, you know what? That's a really bad idea. Not only is it wrong, think about the theological implications. You've just turned God into using the tool of a long, slow, random, murderous process to bring about humans to earth. How does that malign the character of God? It completely maligns the character of God. God did not use evolution to bring about life on earth. The truth is, God started out everything perfect. He put Adam and Eve in the garden. He says, Adam, you name all the creatures. Then I put you guys as steward and dominion to take dominion over all the creatures. And then when they fell, the umbrella of protection fell down with them. The animals turned carnivorous, started eating each other, and everything went downhill from there. So when people are having cancer and there's bloodshed and violence, we get blamed for that, not for God. God did not use evolution to bring about life on earth. So it's very, very important to believe in the creation account because that has implications for how much fruit you're likely to have as a Christian. And it all goes back to the first 11 chapters of Genesis. So here's a timeline when it comes to dinosaurs. So we do believe that if you take Luke chapter 3 and Genesis 5 and 10, it's very clear. You have about 6,000 years of creation. Some creationists that study this a lot want to pay attention to the set of text known as the Septuagint, and there are some slight differences in the Septuagint body of text that could lead to creation about 7,800 years ago. We're neutral on that position, but it's definitely less than 8,000-year-old creation. But we have no problem with the 6,000-year timeline. So dinosaurs were created on day 6. And then we have the fall and corruption that happened sometime after creation. The flood sets in about 1,656 years after creation, or about 2350 BC. And then 85 different kinds or varieties of dinosaurs at the family level were brought on the ark. So if you look at the ceratopsian families, they would say, well, there's 12 different species or more of these ceratopsian-like dinosaurs, but they all look similar. In fact, they probably were interfertile. There's 1,000 species of dinosaurs, but only about 80 some at the family level. So all Noah had to do to bring representatives of the dinosaurs on board the ark was to bring about 85 varieties at the family level. Not all 1,000 species. There was only a few thousand creatures on the ark, or a few thousand kinds of creatures on the ark in the first place, and probably only about 80 of those varieties were dinosaurs. Then they get off the ark, and what is happening now is they're in world version number 2. Probably less oxygen. The barometric pressures may have been different. The vegetation had not yet grown back like crazy. And you have a lot of extinction going on. And just to fast forward years of research we've done with dragon literature, it's very clear across the world, if you look at all the major populations, that at least 2 species of dinosaurs made it all the way up to the 1600s. We don't believe there's any left now. But the 2 body plans that are repeatedly discussed in history books, eyewitness accounts, carvings, the whole bit, are theropods and pterosaurs. Those 2 body plans make up most of the dragon myths and legends that are literally in every major culture in the world, but they fizzle about the 1600s or so. So the world that they came into after the flood was much, much different. Harsh climate, they're hunted by man, they're hungry, they're not equipped for this second world. You can't have a sauropod that weighs 100,000 pounds with nostrils that are only twice the size of a modern-day horse, breathing in enough oxygen in this world. Probably didn't fare too well for those creatures after the flood. We know the 6 days happened in just 6 days because God was capable of creating in 6 seconds or minutes or hours or days or weeks. But what did he tell us to believe? Well, he gave us the 4th commandment where he said he chiseled it in stone with his own hand. He gave it to Moses, and Moses gave it to the people. He said, hey, go tell the people in the 4th commandment, no less, that I created the heavens, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is in 6 days. So what were they supposed to believe? Well, they understood what days were. In fact, the Jewish people and the Israelites tracked a day from when the sun went down to the next evening. So they knew what a day was. So they were told by God in the 10 Commandments, believe it was 6 days. So if that's true, why should I believe any differently? Well, because of science, right? Who am I going to trust? man's word or God's word. I know that God himself told the Israelites, believe it was 6 days, and so I'm going to believe it was 6 days too. And God even defines what a day is in Genesis. He does all these qualifiers. He says, on the first day he did these things, on the second day he did all these things. And what does he put at the close of every one of the 6 days? There was evening, there was morning, and there was a day, and there was a number. And not some of the time, but every time in the entire Old Testament, if you take a number and the text adds a evening to it, it always means an ordinary day. Or a morning to it always means an ordinary day. Anytime you add a number, it means an ordinary day. And in the text of Genesis 1, God was expressly clear. These are real days. And in Luke chapter 3 and Genesis 5 and 10 talk about the patriarchs that go back, and you add up all their years, and you have about a 6,000-year-old creation. Here's all the lifespans. And did you know, think about this for a minute, that Noah's son Shem lived for 600 years, and Noah knew Methuselah, who was his grandfather, who lived to 969 years, and Methuselah could talk with Seth, Adam's son, for 98 years. So that should blow your mind. About 100 years, did I not say that? So it was, Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, his life overlapped with Seth, Adam's son, for 98 years. It's incredible. So that's how they could pass on all those reliable histories for centuries, because their lives overlapped for so long. If Methuselah was confused about something about creation, well, I'm just going to go over and talk to Adam's son about this. The guy who didn't even have a belly button. Amazing to think about this. So that's how we get the 6,000 years from. So if you take a literal interpretation of Genesis, you've got 6 days of creation. It's perfect. Then we fall, and sin enters into the world, and death comes by sin. That's Romans 5. That's 1 Corinthians. It's very, very clear that death came by sin. And then we have death, and we've got thorns and thistles that come into the fossil record. This is what the Bible says. But then, if this is the case, which it is, we have death and suffering that are brought into the world by Adam and Eve's sin, not as God's plan A. It wasn't God's design. It was because that we fell. If you say, well, it really doesn't matter what you think about millions of years in the Bible, well, and then we have creation. Well, we already have millions of years of death, and we already have thorns and thistles in the fossil record. You see, you can't have that. How in the world could you have millions of years of death, suffering, and bloodshed before Adam and Eve were even here to bring them into the world? Big problem, big theological problem. Many people haven't thought about this. I just talked with a pastor a couple months ago. I've been pastoring for decades. Got his, a good solid seminary degree. He had never heard of this, never thought about this. It's a death before sin issue. So you can't have thorns and thistles and death and bloodshed and violence in the fossil record before Adam and Eve are even here to bring it. So then we have the fall and sin, and then it would have had no effect if that was the case. And that would make, of course, death and suffering God's fault and not ours. So when God said that he had saw that all that he had made, and behold, it was very good, is this very good? An earth where death, suffering, bloodshed, cancer, and carnivorism already existed? Think about it. When a deer gives birth in the forest to a foal and a wolf comes up and eats the deer alive, is that a very good earth? No, you can't have death, bloodshed, and suffering before Adam and Eve were here to bring it into the world. So that's just a little overview of why it is important to believe in young earth. Okay, so let's talk about the book of Job a little bit. Job loses everything. You guys have heard this book before. He's got 4 friends and his wife who offer consolation, some good and some bad. Some are saying, hey, just curse God and die. It's incredible. God took all this stuff away from you. You lost your farm. You lost your kids. You lost everything. And God is sitting back for 39 chapters letting his friends rant at him. Like, Job, think about this, think about that, and his wife saying stuff, and he's got philosophers that are saying stuff. And God doesn't say a thing. It's crickets from God for 39 chapters. Then all of a sudden, God shows up in a whirlwind, and the first thing he tells Job is, grab yourself like a man, you will listen, and I will talk. And look what that look up what that really means. It means gird yourself like a man, like buckle your seatbelt. I'm going to talk to you now and you're going to listen. So God shows up and he takes the scene and he says this, who is this? He's talking about Job and his friends, who darkens counsel by words without knowledge. Now prepare yourself like a man, or gird yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? So God's first dialogue with a human in this book of Job is creation related. Job, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me, Job, if you have understanding. He's using sarcasm. Who determined the measurements of creation? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? To what were its foundations fastened? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Then God shows up and he lays out 10 different animals. He goes straight to his creation when talking with Job. He talks about a lion and a raven and a mountain goat and a wild donkey. And he lays all this stuff out and he says, Job, do you know how this stuff works? He's being sarcastic to Job, but like when he talks about the hawk, he says, well, does the hawk fly by your wisdom and spread its wings towards the south? Does it know how to migrate? Does it know how to fly around? It talks about, do you know when a deer is going to give birth and who commands that? So he takes Job to school by creation. And he says, Job, you didn't do it. I did it. Grab yourself like a man. Buckle up your seatbelt. I'm going to show you that I'm God by what I created. And then, after he's done listing these 10 different animals, he throws down on Behemoth. And he says, Job, consider now Behemoth, which I made along with you, like on the same sixth day of creation. And here comes that second bullet point. He says, this Behemoth thing is the first of all of my ways. And the Hebrew is talking there about the first in a ranked list. God's saying, behold Behemoth, which is the biggest, baddest thing I ever made, and I made it along with you on the sixth day. So God's showing off, and he says, look, this thing sways its tail like a cedar tree. It's unmoved by other animals. It can even stand in the Jordan at a flood stage and drink water in through its mouth. Well, right now, we have to leave behind all the Bibles that have attempted to footnote this and say, oh, it must have been an alligator. Must have been a hippopotamus. Well, hippopotamuses don't have tails that sway like a cedar tree. Their tail's about 6 inches long. And then a crocodile doesn't have a tail that can sway, and it, not a big deal. It's not going to stand in the Nile River and drink in all the water by its mouth. And then it's unapproachable by anyone but its maker. Well, what is this thing? It has to be a sauropod dinosaur, because the sauropod dinosaur, they were, in many cases over 100 feet long. And if it just turns around, it's got a kill radius with its multi-thousand-pound tail that can swipe away anything. So God says the only one that can even get close to this thing is me. And if it stands up, its head is elevated 50 feet up off the ground with eyes on each side, not in the front. So it truly is unapproachable by anything but God. Let's just read the passage. So he says, now look at Behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See his strength in his hips. Well, lots of animals have strength in their hips, but there's something unique about this creature that's got strength in its hips. And its power is in its stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. The bones are like beams of bronze. His ribs are like bars of iron. He's the first or the chief of the ways of God. Only he who made him can bring near his sword. Surely the mountains yield food for him, and all the beasts of the field play there. So it's in the field, and all the animals, everything else is playing around, but it's not afraid of anything. He lies under the lotus trees in a covert of reeds in a marsh. The lotus trees cover him with their shade. The willows by the brook surround him. Indeed, the river may rage, yet he is not disturbed. He's confident, though the Jordan gushes into his mouth, though he takes it in his eyes, or one pierces his nose with the snare, like you. Can anyone take him by his eyes, or can anyone grab his nose with the snare? No, you can't, because it's 50 feet up. So here are the characteristics. There's 14 of them that show why your Bible study notes can't, prove it. It really can't be a hippopotamus or even an elephant or a crocodile, Because if you line up all these 14 characteristics, a sauropod dinosaur is the only fitting animal in the entire biological history of Earth that fits all 14 of those descriptions. So God is showing off by saying, look at this behemoth creature. There's the Hebrew for behemoth. It's used only to describe this creature once in the book of Job. Here's what a sauropod dinosaur looks like. It's got bones that are like tubes of bronze, and there's its tail that can sway like a cedar tree. Look at the strength in its hips and its stomach muscles. And do you know how accurate the Bible is? The Bible says that its bones, like its leg bones, are like tubes of bronze, and that's exactly what the bone would look like if you took a cross-section of a femur of a behemoth. It would be ossified on the outside only, like the cortical bone, but the inside would be the marrow. So it would be like a tube of bronze. And then when it says its strength is in its stomach muscles and its ribs are like bars of iron, did you know that it just so happens that a behemoth, the only bones that are fully ossified in a behemoth and a sauropod are its rib cage bones? They are fully ossified. They're not like a tube. They have to be super strong to hold everything in there. So here's what a sauropod dinosaur bone looks like. Look at the engineering in this. It goes from a hip socket through one massive femur bone that's 5 or 6 feet long into two, and it splits down into the metatarsals and the tarsals. Oh, look at the weight distribution plan here. Is that not genius? Look at that. You go from a hip socket, one big bone distributes the weight down to two and down to multiple and all the way down to the toes. You know, I had a friend once who was an expert in martial arts. I think he has like a dozen different black belts. And we were talking about medieval knights and everything, so I'm like, hey, well, let's go out and throw this spear. And this big stud of a guy couldn't throw a spear. He was throwing it and would just flop on the ground like 20 feet away. I'm like, well, what's going on? He's like, well, I've got a broken toe. And just because he got a broken toe, he couldn't transfer his weight and his power to throw a spear. Look at the weight distribution here that goes all the way down to the toes. This creature weighed 70 tons. And look at how God designed it with his legs. So some scientists have looked at this and they're just baffled. Do you know that behemoth couldn't exist without two different types of engineering feats? Tension loading and compressive loading. You can't have a long neck without a long tail, and you can't have a long tail without a long neck. Someone engineered this creature. It did not evolve. It was found like this, and that's exactly how they build suspension bridges to this day, is modeling these types of engineering things. And if you look at it, looks like a big tower, like a construction tower with all of its vertebrae that go up and all the ligaments and muscles that had to be there to lift its big head up. But the crazy thing is, when you look at its vertebrae, did you know that its vertebrae, and there's multiple vertebrae as you go from its shoulders all the way up to its neck when it enters its head, did you know that the higher vertebrae are more and more pneumatic? They're filled with air. They're like honeycomb to the time where you get to the point where you get to the topmost vertebrae right below his head. They're 90% honeycomb filled with air. They're super, super light. Then you get down to the ones on the bottom, and they're getting more and more ossified, more and more bony material. By the time you get up to the top, it's just matrix. It's like styrofoam up at the top. Only God could engineer something like this, and God chooses to pluck this animal out of his entire kingdom, and he says, Job, check that thing out. I created that thing. And when you start looking at the detail, you can see exactly why God is showing off with this. The orange or the yellow I'm going to fly in with these vertebrae, that's all air. Those are the air pockets in the vertebrae, showing how to get lighter and lighter and lighter as it goes along. Okay, so of course God says he moves his tail like a cedar tree. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. And of course, paleontologists have studied this. Do you know that it's got linking tendons and ligaments that are tied between the tail and the rear of its femur? So just like God says, when it walked, it had to sway its tail. They were tied to its legs. So its legs are pulling its tail to shift its weight for locomotion. This is an amazingly engineered feat that God made with dinosaurs. And of course, behemoth is a sauropod. He moves his tail like a cedar. Well, how big is a cedar tree? Here's some different dinosaur tails as we go up. There's an ankylosaurus, a stegosaurus, It just gets bigger and bigger, maybe a T-Rex. It goes up to a sauropod tail, is huge. I mean, look at the size of that thing. It weighed thousands and thousands of pounds, and you could put a tree over that and say, yeah, it would sway its tail like a cedar tree. What a magnificent way for God to show Job that he is the creator. He chose to use this animal. Then he ends it with this. He says, well, Job, if you thought Behemoth was magnificent, now let's talk about Leviathan. And we have pinned what we believe this creature to be. I'll give the credit to Dr. Brian Thomas from ICR. In fact, Brian has got his PhD from Liverpool in paleobiochemistry. He's got a PhD in dinosaur soft tissue. So he believes that the Leviathan was this creature, and I did some research, and we came down right on top of it. So Leviathan was likely a Deinosuchus, which is a 40-foot-long super croc, more than 2 to 3 times longer and bigger than the biggest crocs out today, weighed up to 7 tons. We know this creature existed. It's in the fossil record. They found dinosaur remains in its stomach. They found Deinosuchus teeth, which are the size of bananas. And it's this big, fearsome, it's called a super croc. There's a couple other species that are in the same category, but there's nothing like Deinosuchus, a huge, huge creature. Here's all the characteristics that God gives in the book of Job, chapter 41. He says, look, this Leviathan is very large because you can't fish for him, you can't approach him to attack him, you can't negotiate with him. And this is very interesting. His skin has got scales that are so closely woven that no air can pass between the scales. And I'm going to show you exactly what those scales look like in a minute. But God just jockeys here with Job and says, look, you can't throw harpoons, spears, arrows, sword, javelin. Nothing can get through this creature's scales. So what are these scales? It's got terrible teeth all the way around its mouth, which is another tell. Rows of scales that are sealed. It's got eyes like the eyelids of the morning, whatever that means. It's fire-breathing. We can talk about that. It's got a strong neck. It's got folds of his flesh that are joined together, a hard heart. He frightens even the mighty when they raise up. Has no fear of man's weapons. Its undersides are like sharp potsherds, like broken jars. It makes the deep boil like a pot. What is that? Why does God say it can make the deep boil like a pot? I'll show you a plausible explanation from that. And he says there's nothing like him on earth that has no fear. He says this creature feared nothing. And the book of Psalms says that this creature played in the shipping ways, in the shipping lanes in the sea. So let's take a look. What we're going to do next is listen to a narration from Job chapter 41 and listen to how God describes Leviathan. Here we go.
Can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? Can you put a reed through his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird? Or will you leash him for your maidens? Will your companions make a banquet of him? Will they apportion him among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hand on him. Remember the battle. Never do it again. Indeed, any hope of overcoming him is false. Shall one not be overwhelmed at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he would dare stir him up. Who then is able to stand against me? Who has preceded me, that I should pay him? Everything under heaven is mine. I will not conceal his limbs, his mighty power or his graceful proportions. Who can remove his outer coat? Who can approach him with a double bridle? Who can open the doors of his face with his terrible teeth all around? His rows of scales are his pride, shut up tightly as with a seal. One is so near another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They stick together and cannot be parted. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning lights. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke goes out of his nostrils, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame goes out of his mouth. Strength dwells in his neck, and sorrow dances before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together. They are firm on him, and cannot be moved. His heart is as hard as stone, even as hard as the lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of his crashings, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it cannot avail, nor does spear, dart, or javelin. He regards iron as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones become like stubble to him. Darts are regarded as straw. He laughs at the threat of javelins. His undersides are like sharp potsherds. He spreads pointed marks in the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. He leaves a shining wake behind him. One would think the deep had white hair. On earth there is nothing like him, which is made without fear. He beholds every high thing. He is king over all the children of pride.
Okay, so it's possible that you guys now know what creature Leviathan was. It's very interesting. As you see, it's a pretty good fitting description of a Deinosuchus. A couple things to point out. We do believe that there are plausible explanations for the whole fire-breathing part, because God's very clear that they had ashes and coals and sparks and flames. And you have to look at our longer version of the video. It takes a while to get into it, but basically there's some fenestrae, some openings that scientists can't even figure out. They know, well, maybe if it breathed through here, what are these extra pair of nostrils for? So there's some anatomical features with this thing that look like it could have been the fire-breathing apparatus. We'll never know because soft tissues don't fossilize in that way. Most of them are going to degrade over time, but there you have the Deinosuchus. So here's the size, about 40 feet in length. Here's the scutes that God says that no weapon system can penetrate. The scutes, we have some replicas back. They're 5 inches in circumference. A crocodile's only about the size of a silver dollar, but Leviathans or Deinosuchus would have been about 5 inches and 1.5 inches thick. We've attacked alligator hornbacks that are from a 10-foot-long alligator and tried to penetrate the hornback with all these scutes of just a 10-foot alligator with spears and 60-pound war bows and Turkish bows and the whole bit, and nothing gets through in a meaningful way. It's amazing. There's its skull, over 4 feet long, and God says it has teeth all the way around its mouth, on the door of its mouth. Would eat dinosaurs. And, and think about, well, if God's just using some mythical stuff, here's a showstopper for the people that are thinking maybe it's just myth. Why would God use, the creator of the universe, why would he use an imaginary creature to demonstrate his power as creator? He would have to evoke and talk about a real creature that he made. So why would God say, you should fear me because I made him, if Leviathan was just an imaginary creature? Especially after God completes a lineup of 11 other real creatures, why is he going to shift and go mythical with Leviathan? So he's talking about a real creature. And, wait a second, smoke and fire out of its nostrils? Well, there is some plausible mechanisms that we've worked out in our longer version of the video there. And in fact, Deinosuchus is the only supercroc that has these unique features, the bulbs on the front of its nose, but because its nostrils were over by its head. So there's something very unique going on with that. And for people who think, well, that's impossible, you can't have a crocodile breathing out any type of fire, well, then I would say, well, look at an electric eel that can kill a 6-foot alligator with over 500 watts of energy. That's pretty weird. An eel, a fish that can generate electricity. What about a little bombardier beetle that has 2 different pouches in its stomach that when mixed together spray out an acid that's over 200 degrees Fahrenheit out of its rear end, out of a nozzle that it can steer and point. And this thing's an inch long. And if a frog tries to grab it, it mixes these two things, aims its nozzle, and sprays a blast of 200-degree chemical agents in the frog's mouth. So if God can make a 1-inch beetle spray that stuff out, what can he do with a 40-foot-long Deinosuchus? Of course, it could definitely, the Leviathan breathe fire. And also look at things like a firefly. God has no limitations of what he can do. And if he can make an electric eel and a bombardier beetle that can blow 200-degree stuff out of its rear end, and a firefly, certainly he can make a creature that could breathe fire. So let's talk a little bit about the flood, because that's how dinosaurs died. It all comes down to what you see on your screen here, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, because Genesis 7 says that on the same day when Noah was 600 years old, all the fountains of the great deep broke open. The Hebrew word there is bakah, which has the idea of a meat cleaver cleaving earth open. And there we have it. You can see the Mid-Atlantic Ridge in the middle, which is a 10,000-mile baseball seam-like ridge. It's right in the middle, perfectly between the continents, because it actually pushed the continents apart. It started before the flood. It was like in a Pangea or a Rodinia-like configuration. The fountains of the great deep broke open and pushed them apart to where they're at now, which is about 3,000 miles apart from each other. But that Mid-Atlantic Ridge is the fountains of the great deep. That's the mechanism that God used for the flood. And if that's true, which we know it is, it's been exhaustively proven by all these theorists that have looked at what's called catastrophic plate tectonics. If that's true, it would have produced 3 different products: mud, sand, and ash. And if you ask me over coffee, hey, Dan, what's your favorite evidence? What's your top-line evidence that you know the dinosaurs died in the flood? I'd say, well, that's easy. It's 3 things. Number 1 is they're buried in a matrix of 3 products: mud, sand, and ash. Number 2, at a microscopic level, collagen and soft tissues that can't be millions of years old. And number 3, look at the extent to which they're buried all over the place. You've got 14 states in the middle of America in the Morrison Formation. The Morrison Formation is about 600,000 square miles. It touches 13 states in the middle of America. That's filled with every known species in the Jurassic in one place, buried under 300 feet of mud. So think about that for a second. If you just want to prove to your friend about Noah's flood, ask them, how do you bury 13 states 300 feet thick with dinosaurs without a worldwide flood? You can't answer the question. You have to take a spark, and people have to become alive to see it, to use the logic and the inference. It's the most obvious thing in the world. You can't fill 13 states with dead dinosaurs and, oh, by the way, mix them up with fish under 300 feet of mud and have it be the complete set of all known Jurassic species in the middle of America. That's it. That proves the flood. But if you want to go further than that, they're buried in 3 different things: mud, sand, and ash. They're buried with these 3 products. It's a composite mixture in many places. Some places it's just ash, some places it's just mud, but in many places it's those 3 things put together. Well, catastrophic plate tectonics would be the exact tool that you would need for that to happen. The 371-day flood, they have 150 days of this going on. You've got the magma coming up when the fountains of the great deep are being broken open. You have newly created seafloor coming out that's spreading bidirectionally, one inland, one going out to sea. It's forming the new seafloor, and the new seafloor comes over to the continents and bumps into them and starts diving underneath. That's how we get a lot of the tsunamis today and a lot of the earthquakes today. It's diving underneath, and when that happens, it builds up tension and breaks loose, and it sends tsunamis out, and that's what's burying the dinosaurs in cycles. And then when it's diving under, it's causing all these volcanics happening along the continental margins. And those volcanics are coming up, pushing up so much ash. In fact, evolutionists even admit this. They say, well, there's this thing in Southern California called the Independence Dyke Swarm. It's a 300-foot-long linear rift volcano that's in Southern California, a little bit east of that, and it bellowed out 4,000 cubic miles of ash. I know you guys were around when Mount St. Helens blew up. It blew up in the 80s, and it darkened the sky for 3 days, ash went over 3 states, and that produced 1/4 of a cubic mile of ash. 1/4 of 1 mile of cubic ash. The Independence Dyke swarm released 4,000 cubic miles of ash, and it spread all over America, and that's why it was sprinkling in as these dinosaurs are being buried in mud and sand. They're buried all over America in that exact fashion. So you have the fountains of the great deep breaking open like in this simulation, and when that does, it's going to start creating new seafloor. It's going to come out and create these super critically heated linear steam jets. It's going to blow up, and there you have the start of tsunamis that are going to go up all over North America. They're all burying dinosaurs really worldwide. We're here just talking about America. There's a new seafloor being created. It comes in and bumps into the land. Then it's going to build up tension and release and send tsunamis up onto land. So here's another animation. You see the new seafloor being created like a conveyor belt, and that's going to go over to the land and bind up and gain tension. So here's the new seafloor, comes up against a landmass like that, builds up tension, just like in Japan, just like in Haiti, and then it's going to break loose and send tsunamis up, and that's why we have the dinosaurs buried in layer after layer after layer. There are some places you can go that you can even say, well, this was tsunami wave number 2 in that layer, and here's another tsunami. You can see the water peel back in the sediment layer, and the water come back in, make a deposit, peel back off again, and the dinosaurs are stuck in the middle of all this stuff. It absolutely happened just like this. Here's the 13 states in the middle of America that are buried in 300 feet of mud. It's called the Morrison Formation. We'll look in and zoom in and take a cross-sectional cut here to see how deep it is. So there it's called the Morrison Formation, 300-foot thick mud pancake that spread 600,000 miles over 13 states, and it's chock full of dead dinosaurs. So we can throw a 747 airplane down into that to see how deep it is. We can look at the Empire State Building. We can use all kinds of examples just to show you how thick 300 feet thick is, but it's spread over 13 states, and it's got, some would say all, but some estimates would say at least 90% of the Jurassic species represented in that single layer. Something caused these dinosaurs to buy it at the same time, and that same layer of 300 feet thick is chock full of marine fossils too, all at the same time. It's breathtaking when you think about it. So when you spread out away from the Morrison Formation, well, you look at it, it's actually 1 million square miles because it goes over parts of 3 countries, multiple states, 1,800 miles stretch wide and 1,000 miles wide. You have all these circles are not 1, not 2, not hundreds, but thousands of dead creatures buried in each one of these circles. You can see the patterns of deposits. It's all over the place. So that's a good example of how these creatures died in mud, sand, and ash. And when we find them today, we often find them built. When you study dinosaur taphonomy, how they're killed and what they're buried in, that's why they're buried in mud, sand, and ash. But here's the biggest reason we talked about this. And you guys, this sounds like an exaggeration. Look, I have a PhD in the behavioral sciences. I testified in court cases for about 20 years. I testified about statistics and research in over 100 state and federal court cases. I'm not one to just jump up and make exaggerations and everything. So I'm going to say 100%, maybe it's 95%. But listen, to bring honor to this statement, we spent hundreds of dollars buying rare books on Abe's books, on paleontology, bones, histology, fossils, the whole bit. So I'll say at least 95%, because there might be a couple of books in the 1960s that mentioned the idea of soft tissue, but most of the books, at least 95% of them, would say between the beginning of the field of paleontology in 1812 all the way up to 1960s, you know what those books said? Bones are stones. You guys went to school, you went to college, went to high school, and when they put a dinosaur bone on the table, what did they say? Well, it's a fossil, and it's been fossilized. It's a stone. They say it's a bone that used to be a bone, but it's been permineralized. It's all been replaced by the minerals in the groundwater. It's just a rock now. Well, that's what they said up until 1960. But then this happened. 150 peer-reviewed scientific journals, not in creationist publications, in secular publications, that would say, you know what, now that we start cracking these bones open, and we didn't before because we didn't think that they could have been younger, we didn't think that they could have had biology in them, but now we're cutting these bones open, and lo and behold, we're finding all this soft tissue in them. 150 peer-reviewed journals now. And it's not just one thing that they're finding, it's 16 different types of things that they're finding. And look at how this bone stretches. That's not 66 million years old if you can stretch it like this. Was on Nova Science. You can pull it and it rebounds completely to its original position. There's no way that's 66 million years old. In fact, we featured a part in our movie called The Ark in the Darkness, where Mark Armitage took a Triceratops horn, he demineralized it, same thing, grabs it with forceps and stretches it out after removing the mineralized parts. So 150 peer-reviewed journal articles that talk about this. And you want to know what? The last two things that they found are incredible. Dinosaur cartilage, like the stuff that's in your knee. Real dinosaur cartilage. How on earth? Do you see why I say it's a broken arrow moment now? It doesn't pass the smell test at all, or scientific tests, that you should be able to find cartilage in a bone that's 66 million years old. It should be either dust or just an impression of what used to be there. And the last one is nerve cells. They found actual nerve fibers in dinosaurs. Incredible. Again, there's no way that stuff's going to last millions of years old. Even in our worldview, with these bones being 4,500 years old, it's still amazing that you could preserve cartilage and nerve cells for that long, for just 4,500 years. Here's a T-Rex bones that we're thin sectioning now, and any forensic expert would say, well, this creature died by asphyxia. There are clotted blood groups inside of vessels there because the animal died by drowning. It didn't die and then get covered over. They would say, no, it died by drowning. And we have this blood product that's absolutely inside of blood vessels. This isn't work that we're doing. But I mentioned before, the big one, the kiss of death for the idea of millions of years in evolution, is the collagen, because the scientists are like, look, collagen should not be able to last more than 1 million years tops. So how does it last for 66 or 65 million years? It's impossible. That's a departure. And this stuff is happening in your guys' lifetime. So when you meet with friends and relatives, I'm going to talk about millions of years in dinosaurs. Well, like, well, haven't you heard? And you can talk about collagen. Okay, so here's what's happening. So now, since 1960 to now, did you know this? There has been a 100% flip in the field of paleontology. Up until the 1960s, if you flew over to Harvard and you held a conference in 1960 and you invited all the brass, all the paleontologists and bone experts around Harvard, and you had 100 paleontologists in the room, and you said, tell me about dinosaur bones, they would say, well, they're fossils. They're hardened impressions of, they're rocks, but they used to be bones, but they're all rocks now. But you know now, if you have the same conference in Harvard, 0% of that same panel can say that, because there's 150 articles that have substantiated soft tissue. So these bones are not stones. It's been a complete turnaround in the field of paleontology. Do you know now they're actually making purses out of synthesized T-Rex collagen? They took the collagen, and we're actually going to buy one of these. I don't care how much it costs. We're going to buy one of these things. It's amazing, because I want to be able to parade it around and say, look at that, I've got I've got a handbag made out of T-Rex leather. Well, how is that even possible? Well, because they found collagen. What do you mean? That's soft tissue. It shouldn't last that long. I'm like, no, it shouldn't. But they took it, they synthesized it, and 3 big firms got together, and they're going to be selling this stuff as designer handbags.
There was a T-Rex that was found in Montana, and inside one of the bones, they found what appeared to be soft tissue, like collagen, right? It's like having a puzzle, but you only have a few pieces, and then you have to like fill in the rest. That's very hard to do. There are lots of different pieces of technology that we used. Some were AI, others were genetic engineering. And at the end, we just had this cell that then we can grow and then tell it to produce leather, essentially. Yeah.
Isn't that incredible? Do you see the irony in this? You know, oh yeah, dinosaurs are millions of years old, but if we can synthesize their collagen, make leather, make millions of dollars, well, then we don't care how old they are. So now they left that. Very interesting.
Job chapter.
So I'll skip that one, but the implications I want to draw now from the book of Job are this. Here we have Job. For 39 chapters, he's got sores. He's covered himself with ashes. He's mourning. He lost everything. and his friends are saying, just curse God and die, and other philosophers are coming to him and everything, and his wife saying stuff. So he's got all these sores. He's having a really hard time. There's his buddies just like, oh man, Job, this is just terrible. What's going on? But what breaks him out of it is when God shows up, lines up 10 different creatures, and he ends with these two. He ends with 2 dinosaurs. Think about this. God takes Job out of his funk by using dinosaurs. And here I am on a Sunday giving you a sermon teaching lesson about dinosaurs, and it's the capstone of the book of Job, and you might not even have known it before. But God uses dinosaurs to close down a thing, because what happens is Job finally repents. This is what he says. After all this stuff, now we're in chapter 42, and after he mourns and whines, and his friends are saying all this stuff, Job finally answers the Lord. And this is 42, because this is after God shows off Behemoth and he shows off Leviathan. Then Job breaks and he says, he answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do everything and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. You asked, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Listen, please, and let me speak. You said, I will question you, and you shall answer me. Then he says, I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. Isn't that fascinating that Job, what brings him to his knees is Leviathan. And he finally breaks. He's like, if you can create something as majestic as a sauropod dinosaur and as fearsome as a 40-foot long Deinosuchus that's breathing fire out of its mouth, lo, behold, I'm going to submit under you, and I'm going to rest under your authority and under the authority of Scripture. That's our hope and prayer for people, that they would have a similar experience, but God used creation to get Job to that place. Okay, guys, I think we wrapped up like a 1-hour tour, so we'll close there. So, all right. But I would love to stay and have some questions. I know I probably stirred the pot on a lot of different topics here, so let me see if I can have some questions. Yes, we'll start here.
During the flood, it says the heavens broke open and the firmament disappeared. Do you hold that the firmament was vapor, liquid, or ice?
Yes, so I think you guys heard that. So there was 2 mechanisms that happened with the flood. The 150-day process of the fountains of the great deep breaking open, and then God says that he stopped the fountains at the 150th day after the zenith of the flood. So that's mechanism number 1. That's the mid-Atlantic ridges. We know that stuff happened. The second mechanism is that for 40 days, the Bible says that the thatch work of heaven was peeled open and the rain came down, torrential rain. So the water was being probably misted by the linear steam jets that were coming up from the fountains, but it was also coming down from the heavens as rain. So what is the firmament? There's been some people that have talked about the canopy idea, and did the canopy break? I can say that many creationists that are over my pay grade have departed from the canopy idea for some pretty technical reasons. So I'm not sure really what that firmament was, but I do know that the Hebrew itself, which is as far as I would want to draw out of it, uses the analogy of like thatch work from a roof being pulled apart. So it was some serious rain that dumped down. In fact, here's something for you to think about. This is just an analogy, and let's put this in the bucket of a possibility. Think about this for a minute. Who shut Noah in the ark? Did he close the door himself? God shut him in. And did you know that God brought him in, God shut them in? How long were they in the ark before the rains came?
7 days.
7 days. And what did the rains represent? Judgment, right? It's interesting for me. I personally think that's an insight about the rapture. I'll go there personally. You guys can think it's crazy or agree with me or whatever. But for me, it's symbolic, like, because God uses numbers in the Bible. It's like, well, isn't that very interesting? Because I believe that. I believe I'm going to be taken into the ark, out of the world, because when people are moved into the ark, they were off the earth. They were out of the earth. They're pulled into the ark. Then they were in there for 7 days before God poured the judgment out on the earth. Isn't that interesting? Good question. Yes. Other questions?
I
Or
just
do you have
want
a
to follow up and
Yeah.
say, it's been shown that there was air pressure greater before the flood than after, and if you study the pterodactyl, it could not fly in today's environment. It needs much higher density of air.
Yeah. Yeah, it takes, in fact, he's right. It takes some of the pterodactyls, like the Quetzalcoatlus and others, would weigh upwards of 400 or 500 pounds, and the flight physics don't work in today's Earth climate. They'd have to climb up a cliff, wait for a storm to pass, and then they could fly down. But they would have to be hit with 16-mile-an-hour winds on their wings just to get their toes lifted up off of the ground. So I have no problem saying that the pressures are different after the flood, and the oxygen layers may have been different as well. I mean, could you imagine how our bodies feel when we're in our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s with gravity? My gosh, wouldn't it be neat to have half as much as gravity when you're living to be 969 years old? So yeah, there's no problem with saying, well, the other thing, there's clues in the Bible. The earth was watered by springs that came up like in the garden, and Adam and Eve are walking around naked, so it was a temperate condition. So there's no, and you've got all these big creatures. So yeah, there's no question that the earth climate was different back then. We can speculate as to how, but I think it did involve barometric pressures and oxygen stuff. So good point. Next question. We can pass the microphone around if we need, and yeah.
Hi, thank you for your sermon there.
Sure.
I've heard recently on actually several occasions that the geologists, hydrologists have been discovering, estimating that in the mantle of the earth, they're finding water in the amounts of over and above what actually exists on earth itself. So there's a huge volume of water floating down underneath, not floating, but up there underneath us. And I'm thinking it's very possible that all got emptied out when the floods came, because they speak of springing forth. And then after the flood, it back down into the mantle. You know, it's just tweaks my interest.
Yeah, I've heard that before. We have studied that a little bit. So there's two ways to look at it. When people say, well, you can't have Noah's flood, there's not enough water to cover the globe. Well, that's not true, because Earth is about 70% covered with water. Where's the water now? Well, it was sheeted back off the continents, because when you have the fountains of the great deep bubbling up like this, pushing the new seafloor out like this, and then there was a lot of uplift. And when God says in Genesis that he shut the fountains off on the 150th day, it goes down. Many people say by 60 feet. These fountains were pulled back down. When that happens, it's going to have the effect of huge sheet erosions that's happened. Like you can go see places like Arches National Park. You can see the effect of this. There's big sheet flow that turns into channelized cuts like Monterey Bay, making all these huge underwater canyons the size of Grand Canyon, but all formed underwater from the water being sheeted off and then channelized cut off after the flood. So the water was present enough to do it. But as a matter of scientific fact, yes, they did find huge subterranean deposits of water under the earth, and that was a relatively recent discovery. So could have God created yet more water that did a lot of this damage and then it got pulled back in? Absolutely. But you don't necessarily need to evoke that mechanism. You can say just the water on earth today could have done it. So I'm fine with either way. But that's true. There's studies that have come out that are like, wow, we found all these huge pockets of water that they didn't know previously existed. Good point. Next, yes, over here maybe?
Yep, okay. So I've been hearing lately that the like Hollywood, the classic like the dinosaur roars and stuff are fake, but like obviously, but the scientists that like they came up with the more accurate ones. Do you think those are actually like accurate?
Oh gosh, you would have to ask that question, because I've got a great slide about that. Okay, so I hope I left it in here. Let me see. I may not have. Check this out. Look at this creature. So it's maybe you guys can pronounce this better than I can. Parasaurolophus. Parasaurolophus. This is an artist rendition of a Parasaurolophus. Look at that sonic boom maker on top of its head. What on earth is that horn thing doing? Well, scientists have now estimated they think they know what that thing sounded like by taking the fossilized apparatus and blowing air through it, because it's got multiple chambers in it. And I think I've got a reproduction of that sound here. Let's take a look. Oh, there's what it looked like. Look at the sound chambers in that thing. I mean, is God just not showing off or not? I mean, it would make a huge, huge thing. And I used to be up on the distances, but I know they've estimated that horn is capable of being heard from miles away. I mean, something that could probably break windows. This creature is like 30, 40 feet tall, huge creature. And some of these things, these crests come up when they're 3, 4, 5 feet long. They're huge. Here's what it sounded like. Let's pull this up. Here we go. Just incredible. I mean, that's entirely possible based upon science and what they're doing with the horn and all that stuff. But just, and then we've got Triceratops. I mean, the designs are just incredible. But I absolutely love that creature because of all of God's creatures that He made. You know, if you're diving next to a whale and it makes its special sounds, it can give you a concussion and you can die. What could this creature do if it could make that sound that we just heard? Imagine being 100 feet away when that thing does that. I mean, it's incredible. So I believe that when we get to the new heavens and new earth, these creatures are going to be there again. We'll be able to see this stuff. You and I will get to hang out and be like, oh, remember that talk? There we go. That's a creature right there. You touch it. No, you go touch it. No, you go touch it. So, okay, any more questions? That was a great one. Thanks. Yeah. Any more? I know I'm keeping you guys super long today, but yeah. Yeah. Do we debate what the best dinosaur is? You know, this is funny. I have the strangest family, but God's got humor in all of it. So you can go to our house on any day and then look at my golden retriever, and she's like, well, what's she doing? Oh, she's carrying around Dad's dinosaur bone again. You know, so that's something you'll never see but in our house. And my wife is actually not a super big dinosaur enthusiast. And I'm like, honey, when you see behemoth when we go to heaven, you're going to become a dinosaur enthusiast. She's like, nope, I don't like those things. I'm like, what? You're going to go to heaven and see that stuff. So my family's not super into dinosaurs. My son's wife, Sienna, loves Jurassic Park and Jurassic World and all that stuff, so I'll go see that with her. But for me, the most majestic, amazing things are the one that we just saw, which is cool with the sound that it could make. Of course, God says the behemoth is the grandest, chiefest thing that He ever made, and I think that could actually cause people to pass out if they saw one. It would be that overwhelming. If I walked into a jungle or a swamp and saw that thing, it would immediately in me evoke worship. Like, wow. Like just to listen to the thing stomp through the mud, and I mean, just incredible. So it would be a showstopper. And of course, Leviathan, don't want to have nothing to do with that creature. You don't want to be out in a canoe and see something like that. But I think the most amazing thing to see, if we could go back and see what it was like, was just imagine two triceratops, you know, the 40-foot-long rhinoceros weighs multiple tons with an 8-foot-long head with a huge shield coming up 6 feet over its head like this. Imagine them fighting for mating rights. Two big males, 40 foot long, capable of running 30 miles an hour, clashing with their horns. Just unbelievable stuff. Unbelievable stuff. Other questions? Yeah. There's one in the back over here. Yeah.
Are fossil fuels really from fossils?
Yeah, so they're from biological matter from both flora and fauna. So fossil fuels from oil, when you talk to the guys on the rigs and everything, they're oftentimes pulling up dinosaur parts and pieces, you know, bones, from those fossil finds that can be made really quickly. Oil can be made way more quickly than they say it can be made. In fact, you can make it in a lab in like a week. It's incredible. But I would say it's mostly from plant and organic matter, but it's also mixed up with animals. Yeah. Yeah, and it can be refilled. Yeah, that's what fracking's all about, and they go in to find different pockets and stuff like that. And new oil can be made and redeposited. So, great question. Yeah, you know, I've heard that the North Slopes of Alaska have got enough oil to last in America for like 100 years. They're huge deposits up in Alaska. Yeah, good question. So keep driving your gas cars, I guess. So, yeah. Maybe one or two more questions? Oh, you guys are great. Thank you very much, and I'll be hanging out at the back in case you have more.